is the second Sunday of Advent, and I want to talk about magic and the Magisterium. There are two reasons I want to talk about this today. And this is going to be fairly technical. There's going to be some book quoting done, so I'm going to ask that you bear with me. The first reason is that I still get this question a lot. I get this question a lot, even though I addressed it pretty comprehensively in my first book, in the first chapter. And the PDF of that chapter is available online in my PDF library. But I still get that question a lot, so I would like to address it comprehensively as possible. The second reason is practical, so that when I get this question in the future, I have a link that I can send people and say, okay, here's where I discuss it in detail. And you're free to make up your own mind after that, whether you accept it, reject it, and act according to your conscience. So with that in mind, let us discuss magic and the Magisterium. Is magic permissible according to Catholic teaching? Now, we all know what the hierarchy is going to tell you. We all know what the hierarchy is going to tell you, but let's analyze, what is the hierarchy actually talking about? I talked a little bit about this last week when I discussed definitions of magic. But what is the hierarchy talking about when they say magic? Magic is forbidden. Magic is a form of superstition. Superstition is a form of idolatry. Idolatry is an offense against the first commandment. We're going to break into that. We're going to discuss the history of condemnations about magic. And we're going to discuss whether the magic we do, or the magic that I hope we are doing, is the type of magic that they are talking about. So we're going to begin with a little bit of history. The condemnation of magic is not unique to Christianity. In fact, Christianity simply inherited pre-existing notions and just accepted them uncritically. Okay, I'm going to use the first chapter of Magic of Catholicism to outline the history, because that's where my notes are. What would really help is if I'd actually bookmark this, like I did everything else I'm using today. Around 2000 BC, one of the earliest condemnations we see is in the Code of Hammurabi. And this refers to if somebody accuses someone else of sorcery and can't prove it, then there's a trial by ordeal. If the river shows the man is innocent, the alleged source be innocent, they go forth unharmed. But if he's guilty, he's put to death. That's the oldest law that we know against magic. That specifically refers to casting curses on somebody. Later on, we see this through, especially the Romans. The Romans had a preoccupation with this. Not just proscription of magic, the practice of magic, but even the knowledge of it, even the knowledge of it. I believe we saw this under Lucius Cornelius Sulla. We saw this under Caesar Augustus. And this goes on throughout Roman antiquity. The Jews, we already know the Jewish laws against magic. Exodus 22. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So we already know the rules. Pagans had these rules, Jews had these rules, and all of this was adopted from earlier pagan cultures, and Christianity simply absorbed the mindset, absorbed the rules without criticism. In fact, it does not help. I believe it was Hippolytus in his Refutation of All Heresies, where he describes magic as con artistry and illusion. And indeed, there are a lot of people that are con artists who pretend to be magicians. It was no different back in ancient Roman times or ancient Hammurabi times, Sumerian times, Babylonian times. No different then than it is now with all the different psychic ads we might see on the internet, or for those of us who still read newspapers. It's no different. So, what is the concern of the laws against magic? The concern of these laws was society or the government wanted to protect not just they didn't just want to protect the people against having curses cast on them or being conned out of their hard-earned coin, but they also wanted to protect themselves from being overthrown by somebody who is powerfully in league with spirits. So this is the reason for the rules against magic. Any society that believes in magic will institute rules against the misuse of that power. Keeping that in mind, where do the modern Christian condemnations against magic come from? Very specifically, Augustine basically said there is no magic, there are no witches, it's just superstition to believe this exists. And we see this in the Canon Episcopi, we see this in documents of the early medieval period. An interest in magic did not come about again until the high medieval period, particularly after the conquest of Toledo. The conquest of Toledo is what opened up the way for the grimoires to be written. Now, before the PGM boys can jump in on this and say, the grimoires are just applications of the Greek magical papyri, I'm calling BS on this one. You might have this argument with like the ancient grimoires of like the 1st or 2nd century, but the medieval grimoires were written during a period where the PGM were lost. Nobody even realized they existed anymore, and they were not rediscovered until Anastasi stumbled on them by accident in 1774. So you cannot invoke the Greek magical papyri here, no matter how much of a groupie you are, no matter how much you want to, no matter how much you want to shoehorn your confirmation bias into the narrative of history. Sorry, it does not fit. And yes, there is a specific person I'm aiming that towards. With all that said, the way for the grimoires was paved in 1085 after the Reconquista of Toledo. The Muslims were driven out of Toledo, and they left behind a vast body of literature. Vast body of Arabic literature, which then the Europeans started translating. This was the European reconnection with Greek sources, with ancient Greek sources which were found in Arabic translation. This was Greek philosophy, Greek modes of magic, like Iamblichus Theurgia, perhaps, things of that sort. And of course, Arabic magical formula for dealing with the jinn. In fact, the grimoires are, by and large, and I'm not the first person to say this. I believe the first person to say that will be Adam Pearson on the Christian Grimoire and Folk Magic group on Facebook several years ago. The grimoires were intended for dealing with the jinn. And they are based on Arabic techniques for dealing with the jinn. What happened was they gave the Christian veneer, and Christianity does not have a place for the jinn. In traditional Catholic spiritology, all spirits are either deceased humans or angels or demons. That's it. Humanic or angelic. There's nothing in between, nothing outside that. Except God himself, and God is spirit. Not a spirit, but is spirit. So what happened was, these entities that are dealt with in the grimoires, when these techniques were baptized by Catholic practitioners, they basically became a subgenre of demonic magic. And this bears out in the condemnations. One thing that we find, an early example being St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa contra Gentiles. There's also William of Auvergne, where he talks about a grimoire called the Greater Circle and the 4 demonic kings of the 4 directions. But St. Thomas gives us a more systematic explanation where he says magic is caused by intelligences. They cannot be evil because nothing God made is evil. However, they cannot be good because they produce things that are not good in nature. Then he tells us that magic that can be explained by natural means is permissible, while magic that cannot be explained by natural means is not. That's an important point we're going to come back to. The most notable condemnation from the medieval period comes from Pope John XXII, Super Illius Speculum. I personally believe that he is gearing this towards the clerical necromantic underground, which I will always believe is a cool name for a band. I get first dibs. In Super Audio Speculum, he is specifically speaking of those who seek to bind evil spirits into rings or images, and in order to satisfy material ends, and he likens this to a form of slavery. He says they submit themselves to slavery by doing so, but these people submit themselves. I believe he was speaking to the clerical necromantic underground, and here's why. At the time when John the 22nd was writing, in 1326, there were two major classes of people who knew how to read and write. The first class were the nobility. The second class were the clergy. Now, people generally do magic for three reasons. There are like 5 major reasons, but there are 3 reasons people do it most of the time. To get paid, to get laid, and to get even. Now, the nobility, they had everything they wanted. They didn't really need magic. They didn't need to resort to it. They had the wealth. They could sexually exploit anybody they wanted, whether male or female. And to get even, well, they could just hire a hitman. So they didn't really need to resort to magic. At most, you might have a dalliance or maybe an intellectual curiosity. Amongst the clergy, you had the higher clergy who were basically in the same boat as the nobility, more or less. Some were more pious than others, but you did have a lot of corruption. Right, there's no secret there. Amongst the poorer clergy, and a little aside, is that the seminary system that we know today did not exist until after the Council of Trent. So about the late 16th century. During the medieval period, it could be just the bishop sees the shepherd say, hey, you got the right piety, you got the right piety. I want you to be a priest. I'm going to ordain you. And the training could be anywhere from, it would involve teaching the man to learn how to read and write. It would involve teaching him to learn how to read and write. But beyond that, the training could be anywhere from deep theology to just, okay, learn to read and write, learn how to say mass, and boom, I'm laying hands on you when you're ordained. It varied from diocese to diocese. It varied at the whims of the bishop and what he thought was useful and necessary for this person to do. This left a lot of clergy, as A.E. Waite would describe the circumstances of the medieval sorcerer, as poor, proscribed, legitimate avenues of accumulation and self-improvement were closed off to him. Waite says this in his book of ceremonial magic and pacts. I'm paraphrasing this from memory. It's been a few years since I've read it. And so this is a person, the lower clergy would be the poorer, not the lower clergy, the poorer clergy. These would be the people with the most access to the literature and who would know how to use it, because grimoire magic is book-based. You have to know how to read in order to use it. With that in mind, that's why I believe, and it's just a personal speculation on my part, that John the 22nd was specifically talking about the clerical necromantic underground. And this is a theme that we see recurring throughout the Middle Ages, especially when we see the non-liturgical exorcism manuals borrow quite frankly from the grimoires, and the grimoires borrow quite frankly from the exorcism manuals. In fact, if we want to look at the type of magic that the grimoires were actually giving us, you'll have some which were angelic in nature. The Lucidario Magiae, the Heptameron are probably very good examples. But the majority grimoire literature, it was generally demonic in nature. The probably most standard example of this would be the God, I forget what the Latin title is. It's CLM 849. It's called the Munich Handbook of Necromancy. And what typically gets put out here is the conjuration of mirage. Now, it's spelled like the English word mirage, but in continental Latin, it would be pronounced mirage. This is a place where classical Latinists do a huge disservice to anybody who wants to learn Latin by insisting on only one form of pronunciation. If you do not know the 3 major systems of pronunciation and when and where they were used, it hurts you at analyzing medieval manuscripts. Because commentary on this conjuration often says that it was meant to conjure a mirage of Satan. I reject that because the word mirage comes from French. The Latin root word would be miraticum. It would be a neologism. Miraticum from the word mirari, to look at and wonder. That's where the Spanish mirar comes from, as well as the English word admire. So it is not conjuring a mirage of Satan. It's a spirit named mirage. We could see this based on the root of the word, what the word would actually be in Latin, and the pronunciation the author would have used. Very important. And the conjuration is almost word for word the text of the ritual of exorcism as derived from the Gelasian sacramentary, which is the original sacramentary to contain a complete rite of exorcism. Even the Rituale Romanum is based on it. Our Rituale Romanum, the Gelasian and Gelone sacramentaries. So this is what we find in the medieval books. They are openly conjurations of demonic entities. They sometimes may claim to conjure angelic entities, but treat them as demons or jinn under the guise of demons. Keep all this in mind. So this very specifically is what the church was condemning, because the church was condemning a magic that was the cooperation with demons. Demonoduli would be a better word. Demonolatry is a common word, but demonoduli is the better word. The reason for that is latria versus dulia. Demonolatria, demonodulia. Latria is worship, where the people are actually worshiping the demons. They're lying down prostrate, they're offering up incense, and they're performing sacrifices. They're worshiping the demons. That's demonolatry. Demonoduli is when you're reverencing the demons or you're treating them with friendship, the same way that we would approach the saints. That's demonoduli. So that's why I use that word more so than demonolatry, because it's more accurate for what's actually happening. Most medieval necromancers, they worshiped God, they believed in Jesus, they believed in transubstantiation, the Blessed Mother of the Saints, and they played for Team Catholic, wholeheartedly and wholly devoutly. They just happened to realize, hey, I can use this technology that the church has given me in order to conjure the other team and make them do things for me. Again, demonoduli, not demonolatry. It fails a strict definition. So this is what John the 22nd was condemning. I believe I have belabored the point, so I want to move forward. We're going to talk about two other periods. We're going to talk about in the 16th century and the 20th century, because we need to get to what everybody is talking about when they talk about magic from an exoteric perspective. Exoteric with an X, because I've noticed my pronunciation tends to be misheard every now and then. Okay, in the post-Tridentine period, right after the Council of Trent, the 10 rules for the index of forbidden books was laid down, and books on magic and astrology and so on were condemned, to the point that clergy is not just enough that clergy don't practice it, they're not even allowed to know about it or be able to discuss it intelligently. And we see this decrease. For example, as late as 1600, before that generation had a chance to die off, we see books where clergy discuss magic. They discuss Agrippa, they discuss the grimoires and so on intelligently. They know what's being taught here. But after that point, we see a strong drop. Maybe the last one I'm familiar with is Francesco Maria Guazzo's Compendium Modificarum, where he says thaumaturgy is good because everything God creates is good. That is actually in the front matter of a witch hunting manual. But let's continue. So we first see this developing in literature that trickles down to the common people in the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Okay, to me, this is the true Catechism of the Catholic Church. Now, magic is not mentioned overtly, but what is said in the discussion of the first commandment, the sins against the first commandment, against this commandment, all those sin who have not faith, hope, and charity. Such sinners are very numerous, for they include all who fall into heresy, who reject what Holy Mother Church proposes for our belief, and who give credit to dreams, fortune-telling, and such illusions. It goes on, but that's what we need for this point. It's just one paragraph. When we see textbooks on moral theology, we find them condemning magic and divination almost whole cloth, with very begrudging exceptions for what can be explained naturally, like use of a pendulum or water dowsing, like I explained last week. But again, under the heading of idolatry, subheading superstition, subheading magic and divination, and explains it as the tacit invocation of demons. There is no room for concepts such as the subconscious, concepts such as the astral light, concepts such as intuition or energy. These books make no room for that. No room for any alternative explanation. It's demons. End of discussion. That's how they treat it. Now I'm going to get into a non-official catechism, probably the best possible interpretation of the best possible explanation of the pre-Vatican II era. My Catholic Faith by Bishop Louis Levervoir-Morrow. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Okay, this is one of the best catechetical books from the pre-Vatican II period. In fact, this version was 1965, is slightly after, but the text I'm going to read you is the same identical text as the pre-Vatican II versions. So there's no discrepancy here, pre and post. On page 204 of this book, it's under subheading 97, Religion and Superstition. And the discussion is still the first commandment. A person sins by superstition when he attributes to a creature a power that belongs to God alone. Examples of superstitious practices are the use of charms or spells, belief in dreams, or fortune-telling. And then he actually spends a lot of ink explaining how modern magical practice is just nonsense and only unintelligent persons believe in it. So that there is a lot of poisoning the well here. As today practiced, manifestations of superstitious beliefs are fraudulent. These so-called magicians merely perform sleight of hand tricks. Witches, fortune tellers, and spiritists only use their sharp faculties of observation and their attentive memory. Remember when I said magicians were associated with con artists in ancient times? We see it spelled out here as late as 1965. And yet there are still unintelligent persons who believe in lucky and unlucky days and numbers. They believe finding a horseshoe is good luck, breaking a mirror means 7 years bad luck, and so on. All is nonsense. A charm is anything used with the belief that it has magic power to protect. Spells are words by the saying of which the superstitious believe evil can be averted or good fortune obtained. Notice the word superstition. Notice the slamming of unintelligent people. Notice the association with con artistry and trickery. It goes further. Spiritism consists in attempts to communicate with spirits of the dead or with other spirits. Magic refers to the manifestations of wonders through the intervention of evil spirits, whether real or pretended, going as far as invocation of devils. And to top it off, he finishes with, there is no positive proof that a spiritist or magician has been able to communicate with the spirits of the dead. I think I belabor this enough. So in that discussion, we notice the entire definition is evil spirits, superstition, con artistry, and make-believe. That right there. So finally, we come to the Catechism of the Novus Ordo Church. And no, in my mind, this is not a catechism of the Catholic Church. It is a catechism of the Novus Ordo Church, i.e. the post-Vatican II Church. That is my traditionalist background showing itself and coming back to the forefront, even though I no longer have anything to do with the traditional movement and want nothing to do with them. You saw my 20-year anniversary video, the Io Vicinalia. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I explain my reasons there. We're going to turn to Now, on this one is page 513, and it starts at section 2117. All practices of magic or sorcery by which one attempts to tame occult powers so as to place them at one's service and have a supernatural power over others, even if this were for the sake of restoring their health, are gravely contrary to the virtue of religion. These practices are even more to be condemned when accompanied by the intention of harming someone or when they have recourse to the intervention of demons. Wearing charms is also reprehensible. Spiritism often implies divination or magical practices. The Church, for her part, warns the faithful against it. Recourse to so-called traditional cures does not justify either the invocation of evil powers or the exploitation of another's credulity. Now, it gives a short summary of that in 2138. In this edition is page 517. Superstition is a departure from the worship that we give to the true God. It is manifested in idolatry as in various forms of divination and magic. So I want you to notice and pay attention. We moved from magic that can be explained by natural circumstances and does not have recourse to demons is permissible in the Middle Ages, all the way to it's forbidden in all circumstances. The Latin text dates 1992, the English translation dates 1994. Those are the dates we're using, and this is the text that every internet religious Catholic sees fit to quote whenever they're confronted with the subject. This is the text they go to. This is the text they see as authoritative. So this is what we will consider as current for those who are in communion with the post-Vatican II Church. Are you with me so far? I apologize that we covered a lot of books. I apologize we got so wordy, but I found it necessary to develop the point. Okay, we are here. The question we have to ask ourselves now is the magic that we are practicing, of the sort that is explicitly condemned in these documents? Super Elius Speculum, Thomas Aquinas, the various manuals on moral theology, the catechisms, and so on. Is that what we are practicing? Or are we practicing something very different and defining the word magic differently? And then the question becomes, what principle are we using to determine whether or not this is a lawful practice? Okay. So far, this is what we need to learn to go with. I'm going to start with principles, and then I'm going to work from there. Principles and then definitions. The first thing is, are we looking for a principle that explains what we are doing, or are we just looking for the hierarchy to say yes? In other words, are we looking for a normative principle or regulative principle? Those are terms I borrowed from Protestantism, and they typically refer to matters of worship and liturgy. They have parallels in Catholicism. They have parallels, and they actually apply to every interpretation of law, of every interpretation of a text with rules and all that. The normative principle is if the rules do not say you can't, then yes, you can. If the rules don't explicitly say you can't, then yes, you can. The regulative principle is if the rules do not say yes, you can, then no, you can't. So it's forbidden without an absolute word yes, or it's permitted without an absolute word no. When I was in 8th grade, I was taught this in lines of the Jeffersonian versus the Hamiltonian interpretations of the U.S. Constitution. And to me, that's actually a good way to remember it. Okay, when we go to the principles of Catholic moral theology, see, if you're waiting for the hierarchy to say, yes, you can, you've got a long wait, unless you're speaking privately with a priest. For example, on Facebook a few days ago, I posted an answer I gave to a question here on YouTube for last week's video about whether or not tarot is permissible. And then I gave the general outline, very simplified outline. Going to do a broadcast where I talk specifically about divination, most likely around Pentecost. So be on the lookout for that. I don't have a set schedule for when I broadcast any subject. I just talk about what I feel like talking about a given week. So what happened then in the comments? There was a lady who's been following my Facebook for some time. Very nice lady. And she was discussing her spiritual direction. I found this story very touching. She was discussing her spiritual direction with a qualified Monsignor, and he became interested in her reading of tarot. So for 15 minutes, I think it was 15 minutes a day. I don't remember 15 minutes a day or a week. I don't remember off the top of my head. She would sit down and teach him a little bit. Eventually, he sat down with her. He anointed her hands with oil and said, I give you permission to do this because you are doing God's work. That was such a powerful story. It really hit me. Very few things hit me right here, and that definitely did. That's a powerful story. And this is a priest who is able to overcome the poisoning of the well that's in his formation. And he was able to see what she was doing for what it really was. Very special man. So there are situations where you will have that. I know another man in California. He told his priest they reads tarot. Now I believe he goes to the Newman Center, so it's going to be a more liberal type of clergy there. And they said no problem. Now, in American Catholicism, the liberal versus conservative distinction matters a lot. But still, it's enough to say he found a member of the hierarchy, gave him permission, but you will never find a blanket permission from the hierarchy. And notice these permissions were very specific. You'll never find that. Because in their minds, all forms of magic and divination are connected with the invocation of demons, con artistry, and foolish superstition. And all three of these things are sinful. There's no way around that. So that's their definition. And that's the fate if you're looking for explicit permission. You will not find that under usual circumstances. You may find it under special circumstances if you know a priest personally and he is willing to have an open enough mind, and you can demonstrate that you are not meeting those conditions. Moving on. So the regulative principle is a bust if that's what you're looking for. Most people, however, are looking under the regulative principle. Here's the problem with that. Traditional Catholic moral theology on these questions is decided by a principle known as probabilism, which is probable opinions. The Catholic Encyclopedia, when discussing this, says that when there is no law that forbids something, then you can make arguments that you can. It must explicitly forbid in order for you not to be allowed to do it. Do you see that? And what is explicitly forbidden under the heading of magic is the invocation of demons, tacit or explicit, superstition in something that doesn't work at all, and con artistry. Also, something else you notice in those definitions: attribution of power to a thing, attributing a thing with power that belongs to God alone. Now, we have our foundations. And so if a thing is not explicitly forbidden, those three things are forbidden. If you are not doing those three things, guess what? You can make an argument for yes, you can. The hierarchy may not recognize this argument, but Catholicism does. Catholic moral theology does. And where the hierarchy is divorced from Catholic principles, when they're in conflict, Catholic principles are what went out. This is the essence of the Vincentian canon. Remember, in the 4th century, a large number of the Catholic hierarchy were infected with Arianism. The principles won out over the hierarchy, and Catholicism was reestablished. Right now, we're having the same problem with modernism. The principles will win out eventually, and Catholicism will be reestablished. With that in mind, what is probabilism? Probabilism is the principle that an opinion in favor of liberty, i.e., a freedom of action, is acceptable if the argument behind it is equally is as solid as. Well, if it is a solidly probable argument, I'm going to say as solid, because then we get into equiprobabilism, probabiliorism, and I don't want to get bogged down in all the distinctions. If the opinion is a probable opinion, and there is no law that forbids it, explicitly forbids it, then you are allowed to do it. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. If there is no law that explicitly forbids you from doing this, and you have a solid, probable argument in favor of doing it, you get to do it, at least until such time that a law is created saying otherwise. With that said, the vast majority of us who are watching this are not demonodulers or demonolators. I have a very big problem with those specific forms, demonoduly and demonolatry, and I have an even bigger problem with the fact that it has surfaced so much in the past 15 years, maybe going back the past 50 into the 70s. But I do have a problem with the fact that it has surfaced so much in the modern culture. But that's neither here nor there. The majority of us, our practice is the invocation of angels, the discernment of spirits. It's the pursuit of theosis. It is the use of natural remedies and the natural properties that are biologically there in herbs. And that qualifies as technology. When you're talking about the chemical properties of herbs. The control over, Francisco just said in the chat, the control of our mind. The control of our mind, the control of our focus. So the techniques we are using do not fit under these categories. Now, some internet Catholic may say, but what you're saying is not faithful to the Magisterium. Let me tell you something. The phrase magisterium is just copium for neo-Catholics. That word magisterium means teaching authority. It means teaching authority, and in post-Vatican II documents, it's everywhere. The magisterium says this, the magisterium says that. I want to be faithful to the magisterium. It's not in keeping with the magisterium. Now, in pre-Vatican II documents, it was there, but it was so infrequent you have a hard time finding it with a microscope and tweezers. And today, the only people who say that word all the time are neo-Catholics, the, quote, conservative faction of in the post-Vatican II church. You don't hear it amongst traditionalists that often, and you damn sure don't hear it amongst liberals. So again, it's just copium for neo-Catholics trying to justify their position of blind obedience in spite of evidence that the blind obedience position is not a viable or a sustainable one. In fact, there was a debate that was sent to me a while back. It was a long video. I didn't watch the whole thing, but it was a debate between one prominent neo-Catholic, I forget his name, and one of the Diamond brothers, David the Sedevacantis position. The neo-Catholic got slammed. He got owned hard. And there was some realization in neo-Catholic circles, I was told about this in a Zoom conversation later, that maybe we need to rethink the arguments for our position. Blind obedience of any hierarchy is never a sustainable or valid position. You have to be able to question. In fact, I was locked out of my email for quite a while. I got back in the other night, and I saw one question from several months ago. I have a question for a citation from one of your books. In The Magic of Catholicism, you say that a Catholic principles say a Catholic is supposed to know themselves, their faith, and the world. Citation needed. I only recognize the Bible, the Catechism of the Novus Ordo Church, and a few other things. This is an example of regulative principle. Now, actually, I am going to track down a source. I am going to track that down, but I'm going to track that down. I'm going to get back to her. Actually, I don't remember if it was a man or a woman who emailed me, so I apologize for that. But the fact is, where does Catholicism not say you're supposed to know your faith? Where does Catholicism not encourage you to know your faith? In fact, even the Irish and Irish-American devotional revolution, which is directly responsible for the lockstep attitude of American Catholicism, it encouraged people to know their faith, to know yourself, which is the examination of conscience. The examination of conscience, the spiritual exercises, where you try to rid yourself of a sin or defect. And every step of Catholic spirituality requires you to know yourself, to know your faith. That's why you have catechism classes when you're a child, to know the world. You have to know the world in order to keep yourself from falling into temptation by it. The world, the flesh, and the devil, the three sources of temptation. So when I get a question like that, and I am not casting shade on this individual, I am thanking this individual. I'm thanking this individual profusely for asking the question, because it helps me to understand and gauge what kind of mindsets are out there that we need to address and that we need to talk to. But it's not a valid proposition unless the Magisterium openly says, yes, it is. That's the regulative principle in action. If the book doesn't openly say yes, then the answer is automatically no. That's something we need to be aware of, and I am grateful that this individual made me aware of it. So the principles in mind are this. Examine your practice. You're not going to get a blanket permission. It's very rare that you're going to get a permission from anybody in the hierarchy, though a priest, your confessor, your spiritual director may say something to you in private about it. They may not acknowledge it in public because they have to look after their job and job security. With that said, you analyze your practice. Does my practice pass or fail the test of the three conditions by which the church is defining magic? Goetia / demonoduli, con artistry, vain superstition. Does it pass this test? Or does it fail this test? If it passes the test and does not meet the church's definition, then it is licit. Then what you're doing is okay. What you're doing is practicable. If it fails the test, then you are the person who is in the wrong, and you must either give up your practice or modify it. And to this definition, I will include the invocation of so-called folk saints. I don't care if it's European angels of death, the European angel of death tradition. I don't care. Folk saints have a tendency, because they don't really exist. I don't care if you could say dressed up pagan deities, you could say whatever. They don't really exist, or they're not saints, because how many of them are just canonized murderers and drug dealers? They're not saints. So either you have the spirit of a dead person who is in hell that managed to come to you, or you have a deceiver spirit. Some of these, and Adam Pearson did a blog on this like 2 years ago, referring specifically to St. Cyprian of Antioch. He took a lot of heat from the occulture about this. I endorse what he says. In fact, there's record of this going back hundreds of years of this phenomenon. Folk saints, since they're not actually saints, and this is, I'm actually partial to Saint Guinevere. I'm actually partial. And unfortunately, it means that there will never be a Saint Grey Lady. So, folk saints, and I'm getting a question in the chat, are folk saints for you egregores only? No. Some could be. But no, what generally happens when invoking a folk saint is that another spirit will come to you and pretend to be the saint. Some of these spirits are beneficial. Like some spirit may pretend to be Saint Cyprian. Another may pretend to be Santa Muerte. Another may pretend to be Saint Guinevere. They'll pretend. Some of these are beneficial. Some of these could be your friends. But by and large, the majority are, they pretend to be your friends, but they're manipulative. They want to get you dependent on them. They want to get you dependent on them. They want to get you to where they can control you. And then things in your life will go haywire. The first step in getting free is to give up that folk saint devotion or that folk saint practice. I don't care who I piss off with this. I don't care who I anger. I don't care who I alienate, because my job is not to be popular. My job is to tell you the truth. And even though I go into this series with no intention to knock or insult somebody else's practice, I have to tell you this is the observable reality that I've encountered time and again. And I've fielded enough exorcism cases where I've had to clean up the mess somebody made with these entities. So I will include folk saints, not because I want to bash anybody's practice. I don't want to bash anybody's practice, but because I want you to be safe. I want you to be safe. I don't want you to take those kinds of risks. That's my entire reason. So whether we pass or fail this test is whether or not our practice is something that is licit and can be continued, or our practice is something that is illicit and must be abandoned or reformed. I also feel that I've gone on about this long enough. I may have made some of you sad. I may have made some of you happy. I may have made many of you somewhere in between. But I do think these are important points. Again, in the chat, should we only be working with angels? Ideally, the angels and the saints. And so angelic and humanic spirits. I actually got that word humanic from another video. It's not sure if it was serious magic or comedy. I'm not going to discuss that here. But, okay, angelic or humanic. I find the word useful. We can work with angelic or human entities, i.e. the saints, preferably those canonized, but there are also the souls in purgatory. These could be, because the church does not know how many people are in heaven. The church does not claim to know. And a saint is anybody who is in heaven. These could be our ancestors, our relatives. They could be in purgatory, being purified on their way to heaven. And the souls in purgatory can also intercede for us. I was asked a question yesterday on last week's video. Is it licit to give offerings to the saints and angels? And what kinds of offerings? A glass of water is fine. Think of it as offering a drink to a friend. Incense is not fine because incense in the Catholic paradigm is an act of worship, of latria, and that belongs to God alone. So not incense, but water is okay. There's nothing wrong with food. In fact, there are traditions outside of Christianity where there's a thing called spirit food. Before you have a group meal, you take a plate and you put it outside for the local spirits. It's an act of friendship. It could be an act of appeasement. It could be an act of friendship, depending on the culture, depending on the paradigm they're using. So there's nothing wrong with that. So, but the best example, by far and by wide, is the best offering. Is either public proclamation, like I thank them, like in Protestant churches where they testify, You would be testifying, like a post on social media. Thank you, St. Jude, for coming through for me. Thank you, St. Joseph, for helping me find a job or a house or something. But by far and wide, the best example, the best offering, is how you live your life. Because when the saints intercede for you, when the angels help you, their intention, there's a message on the chat that I want to get to when I finish the thought. Their intention is to help you to have the grace in order to help you to see and want to go to heaven. Their entire purpose for interceding from you is to help you not go to hell. So the best thing you can do as an offering and as a thanksgiving is to live your life right, to get with God. Okay, in the chat, I feel I've had the most demonic attacks praying for working with the souls in purgatory. I totally see that. Especially because okay, I know the person who made the comment. He's under some bloke. Okay, I know him. We've talked back and forth for a few years. Okay. If you are particularly devout or particularly powerful or particularly good at what you do, you will become a beacon for demonic attacks. Think of it this way. The stronger you are in your spirituality, the more of a beacon you are. You know how the Golden Dawn, for example, says that when you trace a pentagram, you light up the astral and you attract entities to you? Well, you light up the astral with your inner spiritual light. Entities will be drawn to you. Entities will attempt to test you. They will attempt to get their hooks into you. They will attempt to lead you astray. So when you pray for or work with the souls of purgatory, which actually is an act of attempting to redeem them and get them into heaven faster. Purgatory is a guaranteed track into heaven. It's just a matter of whether they get there sooner or later. So praying for them is trying to help them get there faster. Asking their intercession when they intercede for you, you're trying to help them get there faster. And so when you try to do this, a spiritual work of mercy, these entities will try to get their hooks into you and lead you astray. I was also asked in the chat, actually the chat's not showing up right now, so I'm saying this from memory. Do you believe that angels are manifestations of the energies of archangels? No, the archangels are a separate order. The archangels are the order associated with the sphere of Mercury. The angels are associated with the sphere of the moon. They are the closest to the sublunary sphere, and they tend to do the most of the actual work. Okay, amongst the 9 orders of angels, each of the orders is associated with the planetary sphere. So when we see the tree of life, most magicians are familiar with the tree of life in Jewish angelology. We have the 10 orders of angels and the 10 sephiros of the tree. In Catholic angelology, it's not as strictly defined, but we see something similar where each of the 9 angels is associated with one of the 9 spheres of the heavens. With the angels at the lunar sphere and the seraphim and the empyrean. Jewish angelology gives us the Eshim, which is the souls of fire, or it can mean men or flames, depending on where your vowel points are. Where Esh is Hebrew for man, and these are considered the souls of the just. Well, in Catholic spiritology or angelology, this is the communion of saints. So they would be so if we try to translate this over, and it does not translate exactly, if we try to translate, the saints would be the closest to the physical plane, whereas the angels are in the sphere of the moon. I need to make a video about angels and the tree of life. I was just told that. I actually might. This would be much later next year. In fact, maybe the feast of Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, or the guardian angels would be a good time to do that video. At present, there is not a book I recommend about this topic, but what we will find is in diagrams illustrating the map of heaven in Dante's Paradise, you will actually see the orders of angels assigned to different spheres. That's why I refer to my system as the Isidoro-Alighierian system, because I borrow systematizations from St. Isidore of Seville and from Dante Alighieri. Chad also said online course, I might do that. Okay, I've pretty much finished with what I have to say. I've been here for almost an hour. 55 minutes is what the ticker is claiming. So I'm going to close this out today. I do hope that you found this informative. I do hope you found this useful. And I hope that you'll get some good mileage out of this. Even in spite of my ranting about folk saints and magisterium. So I'm going to take into consideration some of the suggestions that were made in the chat. I do hope that the chat actually transfers over this week, because last week the chat somehow got deleted. I don't know what YouTube did or how YouTube did it. And lastly, I did notice that I'm over 1,000 subscribers now. I want to thank you for that. And for an example of divine magic that absolutely does not do the things that are condemned, I want to recommend Ignotus Amicus' idea of sophiurgy, of wisdom working. Okay, I've not watched all his videos in the series yet. I plan to. But he's on to something. He's on to something big. He's on to something awesome. He's very intelligent. He knows what he's talking about. And it is an absolute crime against God and man that this man does not have more subscribers. So please check him out. Most YouTubers say, like, subscribe, click the bell. Do not do that for me. Well, if you want to, go ahead and do it for me if you want to. But I'm not going to tell you to do it for me. I'm going to tell you to do it for him. I'll pop links in the description after this video processes and it's up and ready. In the meantime, peace to you all. Have a holy and productive week. I will see you on Facebook Live Wednesday morning when I say the Mass for Combined Intentions. And may the peace of Almighty God, which passeth all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Trying to find the button for ending this. Here we go.